Tonight on Primetime, tensions are rising across East Asia as Chinese Coast Guard ships sail close to Japan-administered islands. Tokyo's defense posture is hardening, alliances are tightening, and a wave of international scrutiny is piling on the pressure. So how worried should people be? Is this real danger or just diplomatic theatre? Well, good evening. Tonight we're looking at a confrontation that has widened beyond a single incident. Beijing's expanded presence around disputed waters, a rare joint air operation with Moscow, and new layers of diplomatic pressure have all amplified concerns in Tokyo and across the region. And while both sides maintain dialogue, neither is stepping back from hardened positions that have been building for months. A-News's Laura Westbrook is following the latest developments, including the fresh claims and counterclaims between the two governments. Laura.
Well, Guy, this is the latest in this diplomatic spat between China and Japan that started when Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takeichi suggested Tokyo could take military action if Beijing attacked the self-ruled island of Taiwan. Now, Japan has claimed a Chinese military jet locked its radar on Japanese fighter jets near the southern island of Okinawa, calling it a dangerous act. Japan's defense ministry says a Chinese J-15 intermittently targeted its fire control radar at Japanese F-15s on 2 occasions last Saturday. A fire control radar lock is one of the most threatening acts a military aircraft can take, as it signals a potential attack, often forcing the targeted aircraft to take evasive action. China, though, has blamed Japan for sending aircraft to repeatedly approach and disrupt the Chinese Navy as it was conducting training exercises. At a meeting with German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful in Beijing this week, China's top diplomat Wang Yi said that Japan's leader was trying to exploit Taiwan to provoke trouble and threaten China militarily, calling it completely unacceptable. China claims Taiwan as its own to be reunited by force if necessary. Meanwhile, the United States has, for the first time, criticized China for aiming radars at Japanese military aircraft, saying that China's actions are not conducive to regional peace and stability.
The United States has sided with Japan over China following Beijing's alleged use of radar against Japanese military planes. It's the first time that Washington has weighed in on the issue as both Asian countries offered opposing narratives. Jagruti Duvey has more now from Washington.
Well, Guy, the United States has been working to stabilise its relationship with China on the trade front, but this latest episode shows the US is still prepared to criticise China when it comes to security issues. Late on Tuesday, a US State Department spokesperson said China's actions are not conducive to regional peace and stability, adding that the US-Japan alliance is stronger and more united than ever. Now, Japanese officials responded positively to the comments from Washington. Japan's chief cabinet secretary said they demonstrate the strong US-Japan alliance. Tokyo, while acknowledging China's claim that it had advance warning of Beijing's military exercise, says the information was insufficient, and it's accusing Beijing's warplanes of aiming radar at its air self-defense force jets on Saturday. China's foreign ministry spokesperson didn't comment on the US's response, but said he hoped the international community won't be, quote, deceived by Japan. He also said China's training exercise in relevant waters and airspace fully complies with international law and international practice. All this comes amid rising tensions between the two Asian countries over Japan's position on Taiwan. Donald Trump hasn't spoken much about the US position on Taiwan, but the new US National Security Strategy for Asia described deterring a conflict over Taiwan as a priority. The document also says the United States does not support any unilateral change to the status quo in the Taiwan Strait.
Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Sujiro Takashita, a professor of management at the University of Shizuoka in Japan. Professor, it's always good to see you on A News. Thank you very much for joining us, and not least because it's gone 1 a.m. I think in Tokyo. So we really very much appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Not a problem at all.
And when you look at the last few days as a whole, then how is Tokyo assessing, evaluating what it's seen from China?
Well, it's become a very big row, as you point out clearly in your report. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are feeling that, here we go again. It's a typical Chinese methodology of, in my opinion, elementary school type of bullying, where they are being told something that they don't like, and they basically try to retaliate through something that is totally different. Also, mingling with various simple ways or makeup, and making it a very big propaganda scheme. And that's exactly the typical methodology of the Chinese government they're conducting. So in many sense, it really doesn't come as a surprise of the various actions that they're conducting as we speak right now.
So there's a sense that the Japanese government believe that this is retaliatory. This isn't part of some longer term strategic play going on. This is really just, as you put it, a retaliatory piece of positioning. Yeah, tit for tat.
Well, one example, Guy, for example, is China is, the government is warning these that it's very dangerous to visit Japan, and as you know, there's been a massive cancellation of flights and reservation and what have you. But if you look at the serious crime that's conducted to the Chinese, many of the cases where suspect and victim are Chinese, in 2048 incidents of serious crime, and in 24 there were only 45, and up to October this year there's only 28. It's declining, actually, unlike the case where in China, where last year a 10-year-old child was slashed to death by Japan-hating Chinese, and also Japanese school bus being attacked. So it's quite different. It's totally the other way around. But they claim that it's dangerous in Japan, and I don't know the definition of danger of the Chinese government they talk about, but it's very clear from this incident alone, and also stopping the Japanese seafood again for whatever the scientific reason that exists. It's basically retaliating through something that is totally different to have their way through. Again, this is very much like a fifth grade, elementary bullying kid. And no offense to fifth grade kids, but certainly it's at that level. And again, they've done this before. It's their typical methodology. So basically, I think for many, at least for me, it's here we go again. We've seen this before, and they're.
How far in that case do you think Japan can go with the tough talk, doing things that China might see as a provocation or just things they may not like? Given that the economies are quite closely intertwined, given what we know about China wanting to maintain a strong position, obviously in the region, how far does Japan dare push this its sort of sense of maintaining its strong identity and assertiveness in the region?
Let me make one thing very clear. Japan is not making a hardline stance or anything. But what Ms. Takaichi and the Japanese regime is basically stating is a fact. I mean, if our ally, a very close ally, our brotherhood Taiwan, being attacked and invaded by China, then that would be considered as, for Japan, survival threatening armed attack. And that is a very obvious fact. And Japan is not being hardened in anything. They're just stating the fact, which is quite normal. And China didn't like that because they want to think or basically uh, bring out a idea that Taiwan is part of China, which is not, but they want to certainly advertise that throughout the world. So basically, they're the one who's taking the extremely hard stance. Japan is not taking hard stance. Japan is not making and harden a tough negotiation or anything. They're really stating the fact.
And what level of involvement does Tokyo want to see from Washington on this? I mean, presumably some involvement is helpful, too much involvement may be unhelpful. Just give us your assessment of that.
Well, Japan and U.S., as you reported earlier, is a very strong allied, I would say, relationship. And, the peace area cannot be sustained without the military power of the United States. That's very clear because China or Russia, these unitarian states would definitely move if the pressure from the U.S. wasn't there. So obviously it is the utmost importance as far as security measures are concerned. And to have the United States back us up on very obvious thing, as you reported earlier. Obviously, what the Chinese are doing right now is evoking a military, issue. It's virtually an act of war, what they've done. So obviously they should be criticized. And, U.S. is basically being fair on their assessment, on their, comments, I think.
I mean, governments, intelligence agencies, security services spend huge amounts of time, don't they, planning different scenarios, imagining, estimating what other actors will do in response to all sorts of different variables. Yep. What is Tokyo's longer term plan for dealing with Beijing? Knowing what we know about both countries, how does Tokyo plan to deal with Beijing over the next sort of 2 to 5 years?
Well, the fact of the matter is that Japan and China still has a very strong tie on trade side. China remains to be the largest, import and second strongest in export after United States. So obviously, the economic situation is fairly hot. That said, export to China is declining on a double digit in the past 2 years, and many of this is due to the fact that we need to decrease the amount of excessive reliability, to China, particularly in this global chain. I think we realized that during the COVID-19. And, I think a lot of Japanese corporations, too, are starting to realize about the country risk that is involved by dealing with China or Chinese corporations. So, this is a very unfortunate thing, I think. But, the fact of the matter is we have to continuously and slowly decline the overdependence to China, as is with the opinion of many other free nations in the West, including the likes of Australia, who also had a very similar incident to this one, where China wants to retaliate and bully their way through, by or utilizing their economic powers on issues that are totally irrelevant.
And we've spoken about the politicians and the leaders, the geopolitics of all this. What about ordinary people, citizens living in Japanese cities, towns? What's your sense of how they feel at the moment in relation to this issue? Is there a sense of fear, a trepidation? Is there possibly even a sort of rise in anti-Chinese sentiment? How is this affecting the regular population?
Well, most Japanese are sick and tired of this because, as I told you before, they've seen this before. It's a typical Chinese government methodology and totally unreasonable and senseless and unscientific in any, issues that they bring out. The logic isn't there. So, most of the Japanese public is basically feeling sick and tired of the way the Chinese government is trying to cope with this issue. But there are, of course, movement, in my opinion, wishy-washy, boneless type of talks about, China basically leaving out Japan on tourism, et cetera, which in my opinion is, one shouldn't really bend, to these threats or blackmails. But, a lot of Japanese, I would say, is lacking in the feeling of urgency about international affairs because we've had a very, very peaceful situation, since 1945. But in many sense, I think it's also a wake-up call for many of the Japanese to realize that we're all part of this. Because if Taiwan is invaded, guess which country is next? So I think there's a lot of wake-up call amongst the Japanese public about the international threats and possible complicated and negative issues that might come through if we don't stand firm on this issue as we speak.
Very interesting indeed. Professor, we thank you for your analysis and in particular for staying up late to join us on the show. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the top business stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Do stay with us.
It's often said the world never sleeps, but who's ready to wake you up with all you need to know about what is happening across the globe and in the region?
We are. Daybreak is live every morning, bringing you a complete wrap-up of the stories from overnight and all the news already happening in the world.
The biggest global headlines, the key regional developments, the must-read stories shaping the day.
We show them, we discuss them, we guide you through their meaning. We give you the news and a first look at the key headlines.
I'm Nadia Johnny.
And I'm Lou Brown.
Join us, it's Daybreak here at A News.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
From Paris,
Dar es Salaam,
Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
If you had to repeat this path, would you do it?
I don't know.
A journey marked not by maps, but by the ones we carry.
Nein. Nein.
This story stretches across continents, empires, and religions. From Germany to Caucasus.
Das ist eine schwere Frage. So heute nicht.
Story of success, friendship, deportations, and disappearances.
Ночью пришли, арестовали моего дядю, и больше о нем мы ничего не знаем.
A community that rose and almost disappeared.
Его расстреляли в 1937 году. Был расстрелян как немецкий шпион.
This is a story of a migration that shouldn't have survived.
Da gibt es eine schöne Geschichte.
Welcome back to Prime Time now. Andy Mioch is here with the latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, tonight we'll be looking at a long-awaited decision by the U.S. Federal Reserve. There's an update on some possible chips exports, some news out of the online world, and aviation rivalry. So, without further ado, we begin in the United States, where the Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates by a 1/4 percentage point. New economic projections are also set to be released alongside the rate decision, ahead of the release of job and inflation reports delayed by the government shutdown.
The US Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates on Wednesday as policymakers grapple with gaps in economic data caused by the recent government shutdown and work through competing views about the risks facing the economy. The anticipated 1/4 percentage point cut may well come with a non-committal or even hawkish approach to next year's rate path, given the division among policymakers between those skeptical about the need for more rate reductions in the face of still elevated inflation, and those who feel the economy and job market may weaken if the US central bank doesn't bring down borrowing costs. New quarterly economic projections to be released alongside the latest rate decision will show how Fed officials expect the economy to evolve in 2026, along with what they see as the appropriate path of rates. Those year-ahead forecasts, however, often become outdated quickly due to incoming data and say little about the pace of expected policy actions. The projections released this week may have a particularly short shelf life. Within days of the Fed's meeting, US statistical agencies will release a large tranche of data delayed by the 43-day shutdown, including job and inflation reports for November.
On to some markets news. SpaceX is reportedly planning one of the largest stock market listings in history next year. The rockets and spacecraft maker is aiming for a valuation of over $1 trillion.
Elon Musk's SpaceX is aiming to hold one of the biggest stock market listings of all time next year, according to reports. SpaceX, which designs and manufactures rockets and spacecraft and is pioneering the idea of reusable rockets, is aiming for a valuation over $1 trillion by selling shares to investors in 2026, Bloomberg and Reuters are both reporting. Bloomberg says SpaceX is seeking to raise significantly more than $30 billion and targeting a valuation of about $1.5 trillion for the whole company. That would be a slightly larger share sale than Saudi Aramco's IPO in 2019, which raised $29 billion, giving the oil giant a valuation of around $1.7 trillion. Reuters says SpaceX is hoping to raise more than $25 billion, with a valuation over $1 trillion. A $1 trillion valuation would put SpaceX into the ranks of the 10 largest US-listed companies. SpaceX is expected to use funds from the public listing to develop space-based data centers, including purchasing the chips required to run them, an idea which both Musk and Google's CEO Sundar Pichai have shown interest in. SpaceX is currently developing Starship, the biggest and most powerful rocket ever, which traveled halfway across world in successful test flight in October.
In computer chips and trade, Chinese ByteDance and Alibaba have approached NVIDIA to purchase its powerful H200 AI chips. This comes following a decision by the US government to allow certain exports to China.
ByteDance and Alibaba have asked NVIDIA about buying its powerful H200 AI chip after US President Donald Trump said he would allow it to be exported to China. 4 people briefed on the matter told Reuters. The Chinese companies are keen to place large orders for NVIDIA's second most powerful artificial intelligence chip, should Beijing give them the green light, 2 of the people said. However, they remain concerned about supply and are seeking clarity from NVIDIA, one added. before Trump's decision to allow Nvidia's Taiwan-manufactured H200 to be exported to China. The most advanced AI semiconductor that could legally be exported to China was the H20. The H200 is almost 6 times as powerful as the H20. The Chinese government has yet to give a clear answer to Trump's announcement on H200. In recent months, it has barred government-funded data centers and Chinese tech companies from buying Nvidia's AI chips, Reuters has reported, pummeling Nvidia's market share in China. The information reported on Wednesday that Chinese regulators gathered representatives from companies, including Alibaba, ByteDance and Tencent Holdings, and asked them to assess their demand for the H200. The officials told the companies they would be informed of Beijing's decision soon, the information said, citing sources. The companies anticipate authorities may need to review purchase requests and require them to provide use cases, the people said, as they mull the costs and benefits of allowing H200 imports at a time they want to encourage sales of AI chips manufactured in China by the likes of Huawei and Cambricon.
World's first social media ban for children came into force. The law in Australia banning accounts for under 16s on 10 platforms, including TikTok and Instagram, is being closely watched by regulators and countries worldwide.
Australia became on Wednesday the first country to ban social media for children under 16. Blocking access in a move welcomed by many parents and child advocates, but criticised by major technology companies and free speech advocates. Starting at midnight, 10 of the largest platforms, including TikTok, Alphabet's YouTube and Meta's Instagram and Facebook, were ordered to block children or face fines of up to 49.5 million Australian dollars under the new law, which is being closely watched by regulators worldwide. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called it a proud day for families and cast the law as proof that policymakers can curb online harms that have outpaced traditional safeguards. While the government has said the ban would not be perfect in its operation, about 200,000 accounts were deactivated by Wednesday on TikTok alone, with hundreds of thousands more to be blocked in the next few days. Several countries from Denmark to New Zealand to Malaysia have signalled they may study or emulate Australia's model, making the country a test case for how far governments can push age gating without stifling speech or innovation.
Over in South Korea, police raided the headquarters of e-commerce giant Coupang after the online retailer experienced a significant data breach affecting approximately 33 million customers.
South Korean police raided Coupang's headquarters in Seoul on Tuesday after the e-commerce firm suffered the country's worst data breach in years, the Yonhap news agency reported. The breach, resulting in personal data for some 33 million Coupang customers being leaked, exposed customers' names, email addresses, phone numbers, shipping addresses, and certain order histories but not payment details or login credentials, Coupang said. On Wednesday, South Korean Prime Minister Kim Min-seok said the government will take stern action if it finds any legal breaches committed by Coupang, according to the Yonhap news agency. The company, whose services are ubiquitous for many Koreans using its rocket fast deliveries, has said it had 24.7 million active commercial users in the third quarter. Coupang and a spokesperson for Seoul Police did not immediately respond to Reuters' request for comment.
And finally, in the world of aviation, Airbus CEO acknowledged the likelihood of defeat in this year's aircraft order race against Boeing, which has posted some 200 net orders more.
Airbus CEO Guillaume Faury conceded likely defeat in the annual order race against Boeing on Wednesday, saying it was possible Boeing would win for the first time in 6 years, helped by settlements over US tariff disputes. Airbus remains ahead of its US rival in deliveries and the pipeline of outstanding orders. Buoyed by strong demand for its 787 long-haul jet, Boeing on Wednesday posted 908 net orders after cancellations between January and November, compared with 700 for Airbus. Analysts say several airlines either placed Boeing orders or timed previously planned order announcements to soothe trade tensions with the United States this year, particularly in Asia. US industry officials say the long-haul 787 is selling well, regardless of trade matters. Airbus is leading on smaller jets, such as the A321.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, very interesting stuff indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, after the break, we take a look at Trump's warning about pulling back support for Ukraine as he brands Europe weak and presses Kyiv to hold elections. Do stay with us. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
If you had to repeat this path, would you do it?
I don't know.
A journey marked not by maps, but by the ones we carry.
Nein.
Ja, doch.
Nein.
This story stretches across continents, empires, and religions. From Germany to Caucasus.
Das ist eine schwere Frage. Du heute nicht.
Story of success, friendship, deportations, and disappearances.
Ночью пришли, арестовали моего дядю, и больше о нем мы ничего не знаем.
A community that rose and almost disappeared.
Его расстреляли в 1937 году. Был расстрелян как немецкий шпион.
This is a story of a migration that shouldn't have survived.
Da gibt's eine schöne Geschichte.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. President Donald Trump is signaling that he may step back from backing Ukraine, using fresh criticism of Europe as his backdrop, calling it weak and in decline. Now, he's now pressing Kyiv to hold elections, arguing the conflict is being used as the reason not to. A message certain to unsettle allies watching this shift. Here's more.
European leaders are facing renewed pressure after US President Donald Trump sharply criticised their approach to the war in Ukraine. He also accused them of failing to act decisively and relying too heavily on Washington. In a wide-ranging interview with Politico, President Trump described Europe as decaying and said its leaders were weak. He argued they had not pushed hard enough for an end to the conflict, claiming they were letting Kyiv fight until they drop. Trump has also increased pressure on his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky to accept a peace deal and even cede territory to Moscow and for Ukraine to hold elections. He said Kiev was using war as a reason not to vote. Zelensky wrote on X that Ukraine and Europe were now working actively on all parts of a possible plan and that their proposals were more developed. He said he expected to submit them to the US on Wednesday. He also said he was ready for elections. Zelensky's term expired in May 2024, but elections were suspended under martial law. He says he will ask for proposals to amend that bill.
First of all, I want to say that I haven't discussed the elections. Second, the question of the elections in Ukraine, I think, depends on our people, and this is a question of the people of Ukraine and not the people of other countries. With all due respect to our partners, I will say frankly that I am ready for the elections. If there is a question that we are clinging to power, or I am personally, and therefore the war does not come to an end, this is an absolutely inadequate story.
Meanwhile, Zelensky visited Italy on Tuesday, met Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and said Ukraine and Europe would soon present the US with refined documents on a peace plan. He also met Pope Leo XIV, and the Vatican announced that both parties stressed the need for dialogue toward a just and lasting peace.
Okay, let's cross live now to Istanbul and speak with Issue Insight Senior Editor John Kavlik. John, good to see you there. Europe is decaying and it's led by weak people. I've got two questions to kick off with. Firstly, is President Trump right in his analysis? Secondly, is this a distraction technique which he thinks will enable him to walk away to some degree from Ukraine?
From his perspective, he's correct. From the European perspective, it's wrong. It is a part of his strategy, and I think the best example we have is from his first term, and that is when he said that the then 30 members of NATO were not spending what they had not only agreed to spend before his first term, reaching that 2 to 3% range, but that he now wanted them to spend 5%. And initially they balked, and they're now making plans, I think other than Poland and maybe one of the Baltics. Nobody's going to meet 5% because it's just politically unsuitable and unsustainable. But he has a way of insulting, cutting to the core argument, getting away from all the nicety. And that's sort of what he's done here. And the goal when he came in January was to extract the U.S. financially from providing funds to Ukraine. He did that. The Europeans stepped in. He then said, we're also going to withdraw from giving weapons, but you can buy them for Ukraine, which they're doing. So he's got a decent track record with this strategy of raising the stakes, insulting everyone, and watching everyone generally respond positively, because he then waves in front of them sanctions, tariffs, and visa revocations.
Yeah, he's very good, isn't he, John, as well, at sort of spotting the optics and then constructing narratives around it. I'm thinking of that, particularly of the point he made about where he said Europe's leaders don't know what to do. I think many people will have seen, the images of Merz, Macron, and Starmer all meeting together, and then they go away, and then they come back and meet together again, and then they go away and come back and meet together again. I think that there does seem to be something in President Trump's ability to be able to see the pictures and create a narrative that resonates with people.
And he moves the process along. Like if we're looking at an issue and there's A and there's Z, what he tends to do, and he's done this in Ukraine, and I'm not saying that he's going to be born out of correct, but what he's done is say, okay, this is where it began on the 24th of February 2022. Russia went in. They went in through Belarus and Russia. They tried to grab Kiev. The Ukrainians pushed them back. They then went east, and they've tried that. Ukraine has pretty much stalled them for the last 4 years. So the Russians have adjusted, but where is the quote reality on the ground today? Russia has about 19%. From President Trump's perspective, Vladimir Putin's not going to give that back. So that's going to stay what he's got. The question is, does he get any more, or does Ukraine move the borders of the oblasts to where the line of contact is? And that way, Russia can say we have 100%, and Ukraine can say we're not giving anything that the Russians already don't have. So President Trump gets to that end game, and then he basically says, okay, this is where we are. So let's stop wasting time and stop all this diplomatic activity. And as you said, mayors Macron and Starmer, along with Maloney, and then you've got von der Leyen from the European Commission, Rutte from NATO, and they're all, Zelensky's going to Italy, the Vatican, see the Pope, he's going to Brussels, he's going to the UK, and he keeps going around. But in the end, Russia's not going to give back what it has. And that's where Trump is pretty much focused on, to get to everybody and say, just stop wasting time, people. I know it's not pleasant, but let's deal in realities.
It's a tricky time, isn't it, for the EU, John, because it's obvious, but the bureaucracy is kind of baked into the construction of the organisation and actually helps, provide some benefits. The almost the modus operandi of the EU, it really helps them to achieve their sort of stated goals. But on the other hand, they're involved in two things now that really highlight the difference between a bureaucratic organisation and someone like President Trump, who is creating the perception of someone who's more action than talk. You've got the economic stagnation, growth stagnation in Europe, where competition has been stifled by too much bureaucracy. Very hard for the EU to do anything to fight against that. Now you've got the conflict in Ukraine, where the EU seems to be kind of hamstrung by needing so many people to agree in order for any action to be taken. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump is able to present himself in comparison as the action man, isn't he?
He absolutely is. And add to the European Union woes issues relating to immigration and migration. And in that regard, as you talked about a little while ago, Donald Trump was able to grab that issue during the campaign of his first term and in the campaign for his second term, and it was a winner, and it remains a winner. And he's sitting back, and what's happening in the European Union right now? They're focusing on migration, they're focusing on migration. So he's basically saying, okay, you don't like what I say and how I say it, but in the end, I'm pretty much target with where you're going to eventually be. So why not stop wasting time and my time, and let's just focus on the end game. And so it's focus on what's a realistic coexistence agreement for Russia and Ukraine, not a peace treaty, because the peace is a state of mind. They hate each other, and they're going to hate each other for generations. So the best we can do is open a chapter of a multi-chapter book, and it's going to be a coexistence agreement. And what are the first things? And now we have President Zelensky saying, well, we're going to come back with our responses. And the Russians have said, well, we're looking at ours. The EU is saying we're looking at this, where NATO's looking at that. And what's really funny here, well, tragic in a way, is that we have this, other than the United States, but we have all these disparate voices, and they're saying we're close. We agree on 26 items, or we agree on 16 items, or we agree on 9 of the 12, but we're really close. And then Keith Kellogg, the former lieutenant general, who's the envoy for Ukraine, he's retiring or leaving in January, but he said out in California this past week, we're at the 10-meter line. We only have a few items that we haven't agreed, but we're really close. But here's what's comical. What are the three items that everyone agrees still needs to be discussed? Securities, territory, and use of the 320 billion in frozen assets. Now, if you remove those from the discussion, it's pretty easy to agree on everything else, but those are the core issues.
John, one of the things we've seen, and we spoke about it a couple of minutes ago, is these regular meetings that are taking place with European leaders. And London in particular seems to be casting itself as a central player. I mean, I'm a Brit. I remember a time when I was very young, a long time ago, when Britain seemed to have a considerable amount of power still, soft power, in the world. I'm not sure they're in a similar place now. Do you think the UK is overstating its real influence on this? And do you think as a result of that, Starmer might have kind of backed himself into a corner somewhat?
I do agree with you. I think, unfortunately for him, the Russian government is, and I just arrived yesterday from Moscow, the Russian government is obsessed with the UK. And it's so interesting because they basically believe that Keir Starmer and MI6 and MI5 and it just every alphabet that is in the UK government lexicon is cause, is effect, is preventing an end to the war, and they're really hammering him. I think the challenge for Keir Starmer is he's trying to be Thatcher-esque. He's trying to even be maybe, like a Tony Blair. He doesn't have that gravitas. And then you have all the domestic issues that he's dealing with. And I do think, the more he devotes to Ukraine, the more money that his government wants to put into Ukraine, I think that's going to be a problem for him. And maybe sort of a reverse psychology. Maybe that's why the Russian government is focusing so much attention on the UK, knowing the reaction is going to have to be from the Starmer government to be tough, to be robust, and spend more money supporting Ukraine, which may end up weakening the Starmer government.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Both Starmer and Macron under huge pressure at home, particularly from the populist right. It's a very, very interesting point. Kyiv arguing, John, that wartime conditions make normal politics impossible, but its reluctance to move at all on elections. Do you think that's adding strain, particularly from Ukraine supporters?
Well, having spent a lot of time in Ukraine, when Ukraine was a part of the USSR and then as it was an independent country, I think, President Zelensky is correct in that absent a coexistence agreement, absent the Russian government agreeing to stop the fighting, trying to implement the mechanics of an election, even with the incredible amount of digitalization that has taken place in Ukraine in the last 4 years. I mean, they've moved digitally in 4 years what most countries would take 20 years to do. It's really impressive what they've done. But you still have 19% of the territory that is under Russian control. So how do you deal with that? And then you have several million Ukrainians that are outside of Ukraine. So how do you deal with those? And internally in Ukraine, you've got millions that are where they're not, where they weren't originally. Can Ukraine figure it out? Yes, but I think the President Zelensky is absolutely right that it can't be it can't be a condition for Russia to end the military conflict. It has to be in advance of, and President Zelensky has already said or indicated that he's not running again, which is smart, to do a clean slate. One of the biggest problems that Ukraine's going to have when the election, well, two things. One, President Zelensky a year ago was asked about elections, and he got a little snippety, and he said, "Fine, you want elections? Then all of you give me $135 million because it's going to cost to run the election. You give me the money, and then maybe I can do it." So he hasn't addressed that issue, but that's coming. You people want an election, give me the money to pay for it, because I'm not going to take money away from the military to pay for elections. So that's the first thing that's going to hit. And then secondly, it's the Russian government is going to use every electronic tool possible to disrupt it. They're just going to. It'll be like catnip. They won't be able to control themselves, even if they say they're going to leave it for a free and fair election. They're not going to. So all of that colliding, I think the president is right to say, we'll guarantee an election 120 days or whatever after a cessation of the military conflict and after we sign a coexistence agreement, but not before.
John, you and I have spoken about this conflict on this show and on other shows. I think it's been a while since I've really asked you about causation, about who's really to blame. I think the longer this conflict has gone on, the more reflection, the more analysis has been done. Where are you at the moment on this? For you, is it clear cut? We hear people talk about, obviously, Putin being the clear protagonist in all of this, but we also hear about EU enlargement, NATO encroachment. Has your analysis of the cause of this conflict changed at all during the time that it's continued?
Really have stayed pretty much intact in that I've always been in the camp that NATO enlargement was not a trigger. And because a NATO member country on the border of the Russian Federation optically doesn't mean anything. When you go to Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, you go up to Finland and Norway and Sweden, they don't have signed billboards, saying "Welcome to NATO land." There isn't, and the economies don't undergo a dramatic change. So I've never been in the camp that the invasion was in part triggered by NATO expansion. And that is somewhat borne out when NATO did take on 2 new members. President Putin ignored it.
So, John, there was a build-up of NATO forces in some countries, there wasn't there? There was at least something that could validate that rationale.
Well, optically, but Russia knows that NATO is a defensive animal. It's not an offensive animal. So I don't know, use the word sensible people, but the realistic or the realpolitik people, Team Putin, they know that NATO encroachment, NATO expansion, more missiles, more nuclear weapons, more troops, more sense, whatever, isn't an administrative or isn't a demonstrative threat to the existence of the Russian Federation. But going to answering your question, the other part, which is people do tend to forget that 2014, the European Union was aggressively courting Ukraine as a member, and it was soon after that we had the overthrow, we had Crimea being invaded. So I've always taken the position that for today's Russian Federation government, its current structure and how it relates to its people, that having Ukraine as an EU member is potentially far more disruptive to the Russian Federation structure, because a EU member Ukraine over nearing 1,000 miles of Russian border, That, unlike NATO signage, that does bring optics. That does bring change. It brings a government change. It brings quality of life. It brings it brings more, hopefully more money. It brings more things where people can just cross the border and, gee, look at the all the stuff that they have in Ukraine because they're an EU member and we're not. So I've always felt that that's more of a that was more of a consideration and remains so. But there is no, I think, that takes the position that in totality, that the Russian Federation had a rationale for the military attack on the 4th of February 2022, when I was sitting in my hotel room in Kharkiv, now destroyed, but there was no justification for it. And so I'm in that camp that Russia started it. Ideally, they should go home, but they're not going to go home, and they're going to end up with 19% or so of Ukraine. Ukraine may end up changing some of its laws and its regulations and its policies, maybe a constitutional change here and there. I think they'll avoid that and try to make changes to laws and regulations and policies. But it's Russia, the economy isn't collapsing, but it's corroding. And all of the spending is having an impact. Prices are going up. People are laying off. People are getting laid off at companies. The 4 years of all the money that's been basically locked in Russia, that's been used to spent on redevelopment and reconstruction, and that's lessening. Inflation is high. People are leaving as best they can, and they're losing a lot of people in terms of dead and wounded to the war. So that's pretty much where I saw it, and pretty much where I see it.
And let's just bring it right up to date now, John, and try and get a sense of where we go from here. I mean, in terms of this seeming stalemate, we've got President Zelensky ruling out talks with President Putin. We've got Moscow insisting that they won't deal with President Zelensky without fresh elections. We've now got Mr. Trump urging elections too. There's the point you made earlier about the cost of putting on those elections. How is it going to be possible to get out of this stalemate? Or at least how is it going to be possible to get out of it anytime soon?
I'll reiterate what I said publicly in Moscow several days ago to a rather large audience. And that if there is a document that is to be signed between the government of Ukraine and the government of the Russian Federation, that President Zelensky's signature is going to be on that document. He's legitimately elected president of Ukraine, and he's going to remain so until, I believe, until there is a coexistence agreement, armistice, whatever we want to call it, that gets signed. And the government, again, what we have going on globally is we have a set of public discussions and negotiations, and then we have a set of private discussions and negotiations. And the Russian Federation understands, and President understands, and Team Putin understands that they're going to be signing a document with President Zelensky's signature on it. And I think they're prepared to do that, but they're not going to make it easy. And so what we're seeing now is, somewhat the closer everyone thinks they are to a resolution, the further away they are, because when people are talking about macro issues, sort of go back to what you were talking about, whether it's with Keir Starmer of the UK or Ursula von der Leyen of the European Union, everyone is in these macro. It's, we love Ukraine. Ukraine's Europe. Ukraine's going to be an EU member. Ukraine's going to be a NATO member. We have to protect Ukraine. We're going to spend what it takes, as long as it takes, as long as it's needed. But then when you start discussing, okay, everybody have your checkbook out for the coalition of the willing. okay, who's prepared to write their check now and leave it in the deposit slip of the European Union? And then it's like, no, we have to go back and talk about that. Okay, who is prepared to put troops on the ground? Well, we have to talk about that. And who's going to pay for those troops? Well, we've got to talk about that too. So it's just all of these little details that go into the discussions, and in the end, it comes back to the big three: territory, security guarantees, and the money. On the security guarantees, Ukraine's not going to get security guarantees because no country is going to sign anything that's more restrictive or more requiring than NATO Article 5. And as you know, when we talked about this, NATO Article 5 is probably one of the most misquoted documents ever, because the perception is an attack on one is an attack on all. It's not. NATO Article 5 doesn't require a NATO member to do anything morally, not anything, and that was at the assistance of the United States in 1945. So that's going to be a reality. No one's going to want to commit to anything that they can't get out of. And then on the money, as we're seeing, the politicians are doing what politicians do. And Keir Starmer said, we want to send, our $20 billion to Ukraine. Everybody is spending the money, not once, not twice, but 3 and 4 times. And then the EU is going to either take money and spend it on Ukraine, or they're going to use the money, the frozen assets, as a backstop.
John,
they're going to use the money as a backstop for the loan. But either way, if Russia is required to pay reparations to Ukraine, Russia's going to say, take it out of the 320. And Ukraine's going to say, well, you owe us, it's about $500 billion in damages. So we want $500 billion. And Russia's going to say, you got 320. We're not paying you twice. That's going to be another issue. So it's like every time they think they've solved one problem, they go deeper and they find another one.
John, we always enjoy, I'm very grateful for your analysis. Thank you very much for joining us from Turkey.
Thank you.
After the break, we take a look at Andrej Babiš's return to power, his new coalition, and what a shift toward Hungary and Slovakia's stance could mean for Czech support to Ukraine. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. The Czech Republic has elected the billionaire Andrej Babiš as the country's new Prime Minister. Now, joining me following October elections, Babiš has agreed to form a majority coalition government. The billionaire was Prime Minister for 4 years until 2021 and promises to fight for the interests of Czech citizens at home and abroad. Now, the new coalition could follow Hungary and Slovakia and shift the Czech Republic away from providing support to Ukraine.
We are, of course, in a hurry because important European councils await us, not only the European Council at the level of Prime Ministers, but also the ECOFIN Council, the Environment Ministers Council, and others. So there is a lot of activity ahead in December, and naturally we would like to take part in it already.
Well, joining me now to discuss the new PM's policies is the EU policy expert Vlad Ortino, who's joining us from Brussels in Belgium. Mr. Ortino, thank you very much for joining us on Prime Time. How should we understand this coalition then? For those of us perhaps less familiar with the new Prime Minister, is this an anti-EU coalition? Is it EU skeptic, or is it something else?
Yes, thank you for having me. I think it is a very, very good question. So if you look at the coalition, the Czech internal politics, and then the EU wider, and then at Ukraine, starting with Ukraine, you have a coalition of the willing. And probably what you see in the Czech Republic starts to be a coalition of the unwilling. So on the coalition of the willing, you know who you have. On the coalition of the unwilling, indeed, you may have a combination of Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Now, there are nuances there. So in terms of the coalition in the Czech Republic, it is a coalition that the new Prime Minister, the old new Prime Minister Babiš, needed to form extremely fast. It is with a far-right party, SPD. It is with a very populist party, the motorists. And clearly, it is a coalition driven to inwards, so to Czech Republic internal problems. However, Prime Minister Babiš is different from Prime Minister Orban or from Robert Fico, so from the Prime Minister of Slovakia, in the way that he is not necessarily an ideologist. He's, as you rightly said, a billionaire. He probably is looking more from the business side than from an ideological side at things. And this may bring a certain difference. Plus, the president of the Czech Republic is actually still pro-European. So there is a combination there which is different from the ones which we see currently in Hungary or in Slovakia.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed. And this coalition of the unwilling, as you phrased it, this pledge to scale back support for Ukraine, how significant is that? How realistic is that? What do you think we're likely to see in terms of actual policies, actual initiatives, things that he does or doesn't do over the next 6-12 months?
It is probably, again, a different approach than what you would have expected traditionally in the unwilling group before Babiš. So actually in the unwilling group before Babiš, there was an ideological opposition to helping Ukraine. And there were clear visits from, for instance, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Hungary to Moscow without any mandate from the EU, actually against what the EU has recommended. I think with Prime Minister Babiš, that is a bit different for many reasons. First of all, again, he has some business interests. And I don't think he will prevent assistance to Ukraine for as long as that assistance will be paid by somebody. So in other words, he will not provide free assistance or check-paid assistance to Ukraine. But if somebody else would so willingly pay for that assistance, he would probably accept it. And this is, again, a difference to Prime Minister Orban or to Prime Minister Fico.
There's a pragmatism to his approach.
There is a business attitude that you see a bit with President Trump. Yes, it's transactional. There is an ideology behind, so it's not like there is no ideology behind, but that ideology can adapt to transactions.
It's very interesting. And
it's a different way.
In terms of issues like migration and environmental rules, how far do you think, now he has been elected, now to some degree the rhetoric has worked, it's achieved at least his first goal, what will he do now on issues like that in terms of friction with the EU? Will he sort of rein that back a bit, or will he continue to push the Czech Republic's agenda and sort of be dismissive of some of the things emerging from Brussels?
Well, I think that the two issues, probably he will look at them a bit differently, migration and the green agenda. In the green agenda, not because he's a fan of the green agenda, he's not, but because of the way in which the Czech economy functions and the dependence of the Czech economy to the automotive sector, he will need probably to strike some deals there with the EU to, encourage his industry, his automotive industry, and protect it. It's a significant part of the Czech economy that he cannot ignore. So there, it's very probable that there will be some form of negotiation and some form of agreement, which will increasingly push probably Czech Republic a bit away from Hungary, because in the Hungarian case, the automotive part is actually more and more a deal with China, so going towards electrical models. So there, there is already a skiff there, but it's clear that at the same time he needs to negotiate with the EU the protection of his automotive industry as is today. Now, on the immigration, it's a bit different. I think on the migration, he will try to be quite strong on the policies. For the moment, there is no huge migratory wave coming to the EU through Czech Republic, so I don't think that he will be able to issue any crisis moment decision on that. But I think if migration wave would come, probably he will react quite aligned with Prime Minister Orban and Prime Minister Fico, and probably he will be very tough on curbing that, because this is part of his core electoral messaging.
And you've spoken about his pragmatic, transactional kind of approach. In one sense, is it quite useful having a billionaire business person as PM? Does it sort of take the edge off ideology, for example? Does it increase the chances of being able to do business with Brussels?
I think billionaires generally, I think that first of all, if they arrive there, probably there is a reason, and probably the reason has to do with a way of organizing things, a way of sensing opportunities, a way of making those opportunities into real economic value. And that would be the conventional liberal thinking about billionaires. I think what we see in the world lately, and I think what we see clearly coming from the United States, is not encouraging. In the way that there is a tendency of decision making, which is probably very rushed and probably very short-oriented transactional. While politics, and especially European politics, are a very complex subject matter with many compromises needed and with a long-term vision needed. If you look at the member states who built a lot of power in the EU, and many speak about the French-German engine, which may have problems nowadays, but still many see it as the engine. In both cases, until very recently, the vision of the EU politics and the negotiations within the EU was long-term. Angela Merkel was there for nearly 2 decades. The French presidents, be it Sarkozy, be it Hollande, or be it before that Jacques Chirac, were therefore also a long term, and they continued the policy of the president into the next mandate. So that longer term vision was actually helping those states to remain engines. And that is true even for member states such as Italy, which changed governments much more and much faster than Germany or France did in the past.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We saw a similar scenario earlier when we were discussing President Trump, who was contrasting himself as a man of action, a man not afraid to make fast decisions, against the EU leaders like Starmer, Merz and Macron, who, as he described it, didn't know what they were doing, were all talk, no action. Is there a similar situation with the new Prime Minister here, that he's someone that seems to elevate and prize fast, kind of off-the-cuff, entrepreneurial, if you like, decisions?
Yes, it is possible that we will do that. Of course, with all, and we will see that with all proportion kept. So the United States and Czech Republic, it's quite different in terms of size and power. But at the same time, yes, it's possible that we would see that. Now, and this is what I was saying, that the billionaire entrepreneurial mood that we saw was not very encouraging. I think it's very, very different to run a corporation and to run a country, especially if that country is fundamental to the world. For that, you basically need much more, a different diplomatic skill set, I would say. And while you are in a transactional mode, you cannot function just by the transactional mode. You basically need to go beyond that, to have a long-term vision and to govern a full administration of a country, which is not a corporate-like group. It's a more difficult one to run. It's a more complex one to run. It's a sum of different political visions and orientations that you need to respect. It has its own time, its own legal time, its own administrative time. And you need to take all that into consideration in order to be an efficient manager, rather than impose from the top fast decisions, which risk not being implemented.
Vlad, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis and for taking the time to join us from Brussels. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After the break, we check in with our correspondents all around the world for the latest developments from their regions. Do stay with us. A-News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm J-Dad.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A-News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Now let's turn to our correspondents around the world for the very latest from their regions. And we start in Europe, where the French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has scored a political victory on Tuesday as the country's divided parliament voted in favour of a 2026 budget bill. Our European correspondent Anita Sharma has more now on the details of the outcome.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where France's National Assembly narrowly adopts the 2026 Social Security budget, a knife-edge vote that averts an immediate political crisis but thrusts France and the EU into a deeper debate over debt and Social Security. After 106 hours of debate, it came down to just 13 votes, 247 in favor, 234 against, and 93 abstentions. A fragile but essential win for Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. The unusually high abstention rate highlights the Assembly's fragmentation. Many MPs rejected the government's concessions, notably the suspension of President Emmanuel Macron's pension reform, yet avoided toppling a minority government already on shaky ground. The deal means next year's Social Security budget will be just under 20 billion euros in deficit, according to the Prime Minister, which is more than the initial aim of 17.6 billion, but an improvement on this year's figure of 23 billion. The budget seeks to contain a healthcare, pensions, and welfare deficit that, if no deal was made, could approach 30 billion euros next year. Defeat would have left Social Security on autopilot, risking a, quote, loss of control over spending and a liquidity crunch. Still, the vote only buys time. France carries one of the Eurozone's largest public deficits, and its social model faces rising health costs and an aging population. The plan is part of efforts to bring the public sector deficit toward 5% of GDP next year and back under the EU's 3% ceiling in 2029. The bill must still clear the Senate, but passage in the National Assembly delivers a crucial boost for the Prime Minister. Yet, Le Cornu still faces the formidable task of finding a similar compromise on the state budget. The deadline for full approval of the Social Security and state budget is in 3 weeks' time. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
To the South Caucasus now, and a new 5-year partnership framework between Georgia and the United Nations has set out priorities for development through to 2030. The agreement outlines economic, social and governance goals. A News' Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Georgia and the United Nations have formalized a new partnership agreement for 2026-2030, a framework meant to guide cooperation on sustainable development at a time when the country's political landscape remains sharply divided. The document, signed by Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze and the UN resident coordinator in Georgia, Didier Trebuch, sets out targets in economic growth, social protection, education and governance. At the signing ceremony, Kobakhidze highlighted strong economic indicators and long-term ambitions to transform Georgia into a high-income state. UN resident coordinator Didier Trebuch underlined that true development is not prosperity for the few, but opportunity for the many, signaling the UN's expectation that reforms must address disparities and protect democratic principles. With only 5 years left to meet global SDG milestones, the new agreement places Georgia at a crossroads, either turning economic growth into broad-based benefits or allowing ongoing political turbulence to undermine long-term development goals. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Well, heading across the Caspian Sea and into Central Asia now, Uzbekistan is introducing a new system to test officials and civil service candidates for their resilience to corruption risks. The phased reform aims to strengthen integrity in state institutions and improve the quality of public administration. Sevil Rajapova is in Tashkent with more.
Uzbekistan is launching a nationwide mechanism to assess the integrity of public officials starting in 2026. The reform, approved by presidential decree, requires mandatory diagnostic for employees in positions with medium and high corruption risks. Those who score low will no longer be allowed to remain in this post and will be reassigned to lower risk roles. Transparency International currently places Uzbekistan 121st out of 180 countries, with a score of 32 out of 100, underscoring the need for deeper reforms. The system will be rolled out in stages through the Anti-Corruption Agency and its Center for Leadership Assessment. From January 1st, 2026, testing will apply to internal anti-corruption control units. From June 2026, it will extend to inspectorates and departments with elevated risks. And by January 2027, compulsory assessment will cover all senior and mid-level positions across government bodies. The decree also introduces a new recruitment process. Officials said the goal is to ensure transparent hiring, reduce past corruption-prone practices, and make governance more results-oriented. New performance indicators and rotation rules for district administrations are also part of the reform package. Regulators believe that screening candidates at the entry level and regularly evaluating current officials will help build a more accountable public sector and strengthen public trust. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Staying in the region, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has arrived in Kazakhstan for an official visit. He's set to hold high-level talks with Kazakh leaders aimed at strengthening trade and economic cooperation. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamazina has more on what we can expect from the visit.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has arrived in Kazakhstan for an official visit aimed at boosting trade, transit and economic cooperation. The two sides plan to sign more than 10 agreements alongside a business forum and an exhibition highlighting shared historical ties. The visit comes as shifting geopolitics and changing transit routes increase the need for stronger regional connectivity. Kazakhstan and Iran maintain a long-standing partnership reinforced by President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's 2022 visit to Tehran, which set a $3 billion trade target, introduced a 14-day visa-free regime and launched the first container train linking Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran and Turkey. Trade momentum has continued from January to September this year. Bilateral turnover reached more than $300 million, with Kazakh exports nearly tripling thanks to growth along the southern branch of the North-South corridor. Faster delivery times via the ports of Aktau and Bandar Abbas have strengthened the route's competitiveness. In talks during the visit are expected to advance plans to expand the Inche-Burun-Bereket-Gogan railway and improve container services, potentially boosting freight flows next year. Analysts point to logistics, agriculture and energy as key drivers of the next phase of cooperation as both countries seek more resilient and diversified trade routes. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Further south in Afghanistan, and efforts to ease rising tensions between Kabul and Islamabad are gathering pace tonight as regional powers step in to prevent further escalation. China has urged dialogue between the two countries. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more details from Kabul.
China is urging calm, calling on Kabul and Islamabad to settle their differences through dialogue. Beijing says it hopes both sides will de-escalate and keep the region stable, adding that China is ready to play a constructive role. This comes as Pakistan's army chief delivers one of his clearest messages yet. General Asim Munir says Afghanistan must choose between maintaining constructive ties with Pakistan or supporting the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP. He stressed that while Pakistan is a peace-loving nation, it will not compromise on its national security, sovereignty and territorial integrity. Kabul, for its part, maintains that the TTP issue is an internal matter for Pakistan. Meanwhile, Iran is preparing to host a major regional meeting in mid-December. Tehran says the growing rift between Kabul and Islamabad has become a national security concern for Iran. Officials from neighboring countries, including Russia and China, are expected to join the talks, which aim to find pathway out of the escalating cross-border tensions. The region is bracing for the meeting amid fresh friction between the two countries, most recently a clash in the Spin-Boldak border area. Multiple rounds of talks have already been held, but all ended without meaningful progress. The Afghan spokesperson has earlier stated that Pakistan's expectations are neither practical nor grounded on the realities on the ground, insisting that Afghanistan cannot be held responsible for Pakistan's internal security challenges. For now, the world watches as diplomatic efforts intensify, with hopes that regional engagement led by China and Iran can prevent further deterioration between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
Well, let's go to China now, where Beijing and Moscow are carrying out scheduled defence exercises as part of their annual cooperation framework. The newest operation adds to several joint activities held in recent months. Manor Makdoum has more.
China and Russia have carried out a joint strategic air patrol over the East China Sea and Western Pacific, conducted under the framework of their annual military cooperation plan. According to China's Defense Ministry, the mission marked the 10th combined air patrol since 2019 and involved long-range bombers, fighter jets, and early warning aircrafts from both sides. This latest patrol followed a year of expanded Sino-Russian military cooperation across multiple domains. In August, the two countries held their flagship naval drill, Joint Sea 2025, near Vladivostok. And after the exercise phase ended, the participating vessels continued into a 2-week joint maritime patrol through the Western Pacific. These activities were accompanied by a third joint anti-missile drill held on Russian territory in early December, highlighting how their cooperation is now expanding into missile defense and strategic early warning fields. Beijing framed the operation as routine and not directed at any third party, while emphasizing that the patrol enhances coordination and deepens strategic trust between the two air forces. Manu Makhtoum, A News, Beijing.
After the break, we take a look at how the Organisation of Turkic States is reshaping Eurasia from security ties to digital integration as more countries turn toward deeper regional cooperation. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Now, regional dynamics in Eurasia are shifting, and a growing number of states are turning toward deeper cooperation under the Organisation of Turkic States. From security to digital innovation, the bloc is expanding its role across the Caucasus and Central Asia. Our report now looks at what's driving this transformation and what it could mean for the wider region.
Look at the map of Eurasia, and one thing stands out. For years, a geopolitical vacuum stretched from the Caucasus to Central Asia, a space neither anchored to Russia nor tied to the West. But that landscape is shifting. A new actor is taking shape. The Organisation of Turkic States. What once began as a modest cooperation platform is now described as a geopolitical centre. A title underscored at the recent Gabala summit on the 7th of October. The rise of the OTS is driven not by culture, but strategy. The Russia-Ukraine war, the Iran-Israel confrontation, instability in Afghanistan, a widening global divide are all forcing Turkic states to rethink their security and economic paths. In a document named The Rise of the OTS, is Turkic cooperation filling a geopolitical vacuum, analyst Svante Cornell notes. These states seek neither to fully align with the West nor fall under a Russia-China-Iran axis. They want their own space, and OTS has become the mechanism to secure it. In just a few years, the organisation has expanded far beyond symbolic summits. It now coordinates work across more than 35 fields, from transport and energy to digitalisation and even space cooperation. Security, however, has been the real turning point. Yet another transformation is happening beneath the surface, a digital and economic integration. Kazakhstan aims for a fully digital state. Uzbekistan is building a massive tech workforce. Turkey is exporting defense and digital technologies, and the OTS is aligning these ambitions. Leaders have already agreed to create a Turkic Digital Innovation Center, a Turkic Artificial Intelligence Network, digitize the Trans-Caspian Corridor, and launch a Green Finance Council steps toward a shared digital ecosystem. At Gabala, the introduction of OTS Plus marked another shift, opening cooperation to non-Turkic states such as Georgia, Pakistan, and potentially Armenia. This marks a shift from an ethnic-based framework to a broader geopolitical platform. Today, the OTS is building east-west transport links, coordinating defense industries, digitalizing borders, and creating shared financial and technological networks.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this further is A News's Orkan Amashov. Orkan, always great to see you.
Great to be here, Guy.
The geography of this is very interesting, isn't it? You know, as was mentioned in the report there, you've got this hugely long stretch. Of course, it includes Kazakhstan, the 9th, I think. Viewers will tell me if I'm wrong, the 9th biggest country.
Yeah, 2.7 million square kilometers.
In the world. Huge country.
Yeah.
So you have this huge stretch. And then what we talked about in the report was this sense of a geopolitical vacuum, which is now being filled by the added structure and cohesion that the OTS is bringing.
Indeed. And what we have noticed over the past practically decades, I would say since 2009, when the Nakhchivan Agreement on the establishment of the Cooperation Council of Turkic-speaking countries, is that from the basic ethno-linguistic element, which has always been at the heart of the cooperation between Turkic countries, we're moving to a structured format. I think that over the past couple of years we've witnessed the organizational aspect of this cooperation developing and evolving. You're absolutely right. There is a geopolitical vacuum of some sort. When the Soviet Union collapsed in early 90s, Central Asian countries were sovereign afterwards, but still largely dependent on Russia. China wasn't very powerful. China was a player, but a player which was acting deliberately and with some caution, trying not to antagonize Russians. Americans, by the way, at that time, during the 1990s, were also quite careful. So basically, Central Asia was largely dependent on Russia, but still Russia wasn't powerful enough to dominate the area. That was a reality. And that was during that stage, in the early 90s, that some of the structures of cooperation emerged. For example, Turksoy, which is a cultural linguistic organization, and so forth. Turning point was 2009, and it was in Nakhchivan, interestingly enough, in Azerbaijan, when the Turkic Council was established. And then in 2021, year after the Karabakh War, the War of 2020, effectively, the Council of Turkic-speaking countries transformed into international organization. So basically, before it was council, mostly dealing with cultural, to a certain extent, economical matters. But in 2021 marked the transformation into geopolitical force. I would say inception of the emergence of Turkic world as a geopolitical factor. This was one thing. And also, the name of the organization was shortened from Turkic-speaking organization, Council of Turkic-speaking countries. It transformed into Turkic, Organization of Turkic States. My feeling, guys, is that it's not just about making sure that the title is shorter, it's also about the essence. We're not merely talking about Turkic-speaking countries, but also Turkic countries in terms of their essence, identity, and so forth. There have been a couple of summits of heads of state. 2021 was in Istanbul. That's emergence of the organization as an international organization. 2022 was in Uzbekistan, in Samarkand, historic and important one. Some important documents were adopted. In 2023, if memory serves me correctly, the summit was in Kazakhstan, in Astana. An Astana document was adopted there. And 2024 was in Kyrgyzstan, naturally in Bishkek, and digital transformation was a key element. And the last one was in Kampala, the 12th summit of heads of state. Basically, you're absolutely right. This organization is now getting bigger in terms of its importance. It is no longer cultural sort of affiliation. It's more geopolitical. A lot is to be done. It's not yet customs union, by the way. Interestingly enough, guys, some of the members, for example, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, they're also members of Eurasian Economic Union dominated by Russia. The question, when this organization does reach a certain degree of coherence, when there is a desire to form a customs regime or common customs union, what will be the decision of those countries? Will they leave Russia-dominated bloc or not? That is a question for future, of course.
Very interesting, yeah. Will there be an insistence on that sort of mutual exclusivity? Very interesting future question.
Basically, the rule of law is said, and basic rule of thumb is said, you can't be members of two customs regime. And that's the reason why, for example, Armenia, which now talks about, which is a member of Eurasian Economic Union, which also wants to forge good relations with this organization, OTS, cannot be member of European Union whilst being member of Eurasian Economic Union. That's a dilemma for them, for example. So you can't be members of two customs regimes. You have to choose.
And we've been talking obviously about the geography, the importance of which cannot be overstated. You mentioned there too the cultural bonds, but also the digital element. That's increasingly an important part of the OTS, isn't it? The combined work on shared AI networks, sharing data, creating a a digital corridor to match the physical one?
Absolutely. I mean, before talking about digital corridor, digital sovereignty, let me say one more thing about the economic sort of basis of this union, of this organization. Central Asia is incredibly important. US, European Union, Russia, China are vying for supremacy in this region. And this region is widely described as a heart of Eurasia. And basically, China wants to get access to European markets, avoiding Russia. It can only be through Central Asia. And basically, if you want to connect Central Asia with Turkey, you should go through Azerbaijan. And then, of course, for Europe to be able to gain access to Chinese markets, they have to go through Turkey, Caucasus, South Caucasus in this particular case, and then Central Asia and China. So vitality there, rare earth minerals of Central Asian countries are an important part of the current debate. And back to the point about digital connectivity. As I'm sure you remember, I was recently in Kazakhstan, I was attending the state visit of President Aliyev. Digital connectivity is a key subject. Basically, when we talk about sovereignty, it's not just about being able to control your borders. It's not just about economic self-sufficiency, but also there must be a self-sufficient digital network. So basically what Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan at this juncture are trying to do, they're trying to create digital corridor via Caspian Sea, which is widely known as Trans-Caspian fiber optic cable. Basically, these two countries do not want to be reliant on Russia because all of the operators, all of the infrastructure will be in Kazakhstan, in Azerbaijan. So basically, digital sovereignty means that if you want to be a digital power, you should make sure all the technology is within your boundaries. If you want to get access to, let's say, Europe, you shouldn't be reliant on Russia in that particular sense. So digital infrastructure, really very complicated area. Recently, I interviewed the chairman of the board of Azer Telecom, and that interview will be aired in a couple of days. The conversation that we had there completely opened my eyes in direction of completely new world. It's not just about corridors, it's not just about export of raw minerals and so forth. We're talking about information, exclusivity of information and the corridors being controlled by certain sovereign powers. And Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, and probably I imagine later Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan as well, because there was a project, will be working on it. And then Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan will form a trilateral format. And this is a key part of the conversation now.
It's very interesting. When tech analysts talk about data being the new oil, situations like this really help kind of bring that to life.
Absolutely. And then, of course, naturally, there will be further expansion. On the basis of this cooperation between Azer Telecom and Kazakh Telecom, which has already been agreed, and I think they start build the actual infrastructure next year, this could be expanded to Middle East as well. Azerbaijan is, for example, currently cooperating with Syria, planning to invest in Syria as per the agreements signed via Turkey. And this brings us to the subject OTS Plus, which was central item during the latest 12th summit of the heads of states in Gabala. Basically, it's a Turkic organization. Essence is Turkic, but OTS Plus means that if you want to really expand economically, you need to cooperate with other countries which are not actually Turkic countries.
And those countries, Georgia?
Yeah, Georgia, Pakistan, and some others. So we've got 5 full members, and you see all of them here: Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Tajikistan is not a member because Tajikistan is not a Turkic country, but it may have in the future different status. We've got Turkmenistan, which is a Turkic country, but because they follow the policy of strict neutrality since the 90s, since they gained their independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they don't want to be full member, but they are observer member together with Hungary and also Northern Cyprus. Northern Cyprus, as you know, is not internationally recognized, and this is actually one of the key subjects when it comes to the relationship of Central Asia with the European Union. In April 2025, this year, when there was a Central Asia Plus EU summit in Samarkand, there was big debate about actually European Union forcing Central Asian countries, including the 3 Turkic countries which are full members of the Organization of Turkic States, not to recognize in the fullness of time Northern Cyprus as an independent state. So there's a dilemma and the fluctuating scenery, which is fascinating to observe.
The progress is impressive, the synergies are obvious, the opportunity is clearly very significant. Where can the OTS go as an organisation? Just how prominent, how significant can it become? What do you expect to happen in the medium term over the next, say, 1 to 5 years?
More organizational coherence, more structuralization. Let's look at this organization in terms of figures, like to understand its essence and figure. Population-wise, what's the overall population? Probably around 180 million. So it's less than European Union. Economy, GDP, I would say around 1.36 trillion US dollars. So what is a GDP size of Spain? About 1.7. So actually, cumulatively, it's because of Turkey's economy is 1.1 trillion US dollars. Cumulatively, this whole countries, 5 countries together, would make one Spain economically. So we're not there yet. It's actually quite small, but potentiality is there. And for that potentiality largely is contingent not upon the population, but population is young, which is a very important factor, but also on the connectivity agenda. So all the routes from China to Europe goes through Central Asia. This is one particular advantage that this organization needs to capitalize. The Caspian Sea problem should be sorted out, of course. Connection via Caspian Sea is vital in order to make sure that Caspian Sea truly becomes connector, not divider. They have to invest massively in the Trans-Caspian projects. That is a department which could be described as lacking, because a lot is to be done. A lot of investment should come. There was a project, it's incredibly, question of Turkmen gas, for example, to be exported to Europe via Caspian Sea was discussed on a number of occasions, but it is very costly, effectively. So some of the problems associated with Caspian Sea should be sorted out. In terms of the future of this organization, there are a couple of competing narratives. For example, let's say Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, they're members of Eurasian Economic Union. Some of them are actually members of the collective security organization dominated by Russia. And there will be a moment, as I mentioned whilst replying to your first question, the choice needs to be made about defense cooperation. Currently, Turkey is actively involved in exporting its defense products to Azerbaijan and then potentially to Central Asia. This will create a certain degree of dilemma for this country, for Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan in particular, because Uzbekistan is not a member of the collective security treaty organization, in terms of choosing between Russia and Turkey.
And we're not there yet, but it's coming.
We'll not be there for the next few years, but it's definitely coming. Choice will be made. But it is very important for this organization to position itself not as an enemy or antagonist to any other bloc. So to be very humble at the beginning, talk about cooperation, consolidation. When the right time comes, the right resources will help to achieve the right objectives.
Fascinating stuff. Orkan, always a joy to have you in the studio with us. Thank you very much.
Okay, that does bring us to the end of Prime Time. Do join us again tomorrow evening for more insight, analysis and perspective from right here in Baku and around the world. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.